So back, we're talking FF7, we're talking Rebirth. My initial plan with this video was to continue doing the Inside Final Fantasy VII Rebirth videos, but they actually dropped like another big video today, actually, on the Square Enix music channel of all channels, with Nomura, Nojima, and Uematsu. It's a big 40-minute video. About this too is that it's not like a interview necessarily, it's just all three of them in a room together talking, which is something we don't get very often. It's usually the talking head shit when it comes to these kinds of videos, right, where they're probably in completely separate maybe locations, cities, whatever the fuck, just doing these kind of like interviews, right? It's just all three of the boys together talking about this shit, which I absolutely love. I don't know what all is worth talking about within this big massive 40-minute video, but I do know there's at least several talking points just because of the shit I've seen online. Well, I am absolutely a fan, of course, of Nojima and Nomura. I think I'm most excited with this massive video because it involves Uematsu. I mean, come on, the guy's made some of the most iconic video game music all time. He's one of like the OGs. Like so many like iconic video game composers from any of the video games that you love potentially look up to him, right? He's been doing this for so damn long. If you're a fan of Final Fantasy, it's potentially because of him, just because of how iconic the music is in pretty much all the games, right? So just to hear him talk about the remake project is going to be exciting for me. And I know he doesn't do like full-time music anymore. And I know he said very recently that he doesn't think he has like a full video game soundtrack him anymore. I'm glad that he's still a part of the remake project, doing Hollow, doing No Promises to Keep, right? And I'm excited for whatever he brings to the third game. Per usual fashion with these kinds of videos, I'll be watching the video off camera and we'll come back and talk about things that are worth talking about. Let's hop into it. I mean, right at the gate, we could talk about the very beginning of the video. It has nothing to do with Final Fantasy VII, but Uematsu's kind of reminiscing on how they all met or whatever. And then Nomura came on board with Final Fantasy V, and he starts talking about the rap party for Final Fantasy VI, and Nomura coming up to Sakaguchi and asking him for more money, and just the laugh that they both let out, so damn wholesome.
始まってしばらくしてから、なんかね、僕のところに来てね、もっと金が欲しいって言って。
There's actually more moments like this at the beginning of the video where Nomura's talking about not having money back then, but them all going to Uematsu's house and it was like a palace and just everybody laughing together. And that's what I love about this, the setting of all three of them in a room talking together as opposed to just doing like video interviews or whatever the fuck.
遊びに行ったことがあって、みんなで、すごいいい家住んでた。すごいいい家住んでると思って、びっくりして。
I wasn't planning to get all this like cool backstory stuff with this video. I did, without having watched it yet, I thought it was just going to be about FF7. But we got like Uematsu talking about meeting Nojima's first project being Final Fantasy VII, and like their common interests of like rock music and pro wrestling, and how a lot of people at Square used to go to the bar together to drink, and they would just talk about rock music and pro wrestling there. And it's just kind of cool to see because they're all fans of pro wrestling, which I grew up being a fan of pro wrestling, still am a fan of pro wrestling, and I know even in Japan these days like wrestling's still very, very massive. So it's just kind of cool.
だから他にもロックとかプロレスとか好きなやつらが何人かスクエアにいましたんで、よく某居酒屋さんとか飲んでましたね。ずっと本当にロックとプロレスの話ばっかりして飲んでた。
Didn't have Nojima talking about Nomura back in the day and how like they didn't interact too much. Like they just uploaded their work onto like the server, I guess, at the Square offices, whatever. And it's talking about like the employee directory, the Square Times, and how like no matter how many years changed, Nomura's picture and his quote never changed, right? He just kind of kept it the same forever. And just hearing Nomura laugh, like I feel like every time I've ever seen Nomura be a part of like interviews and shit, he's very stoic and quiet and kind of soft-spoken. Just hearing how much he's laughed already just a few minutes into this video, I love it, man.
スクエアタイムズ。
スクエアタイムズだ。
っていうので写真の載ってて、哲さんのところが年が変わっても写真も何もコメントも変わってなくて。
They move on to a section where they talk about their impressions of each other. Nomura opens it up saying that he's comfortable working with these two, Nojima and Uematsu. That fans around the world trust them, so he's never too worried when he asks them to do something. Again, for the most part, completely agree with, right? A lot of the devs at Square Enix get hate in some capacity besides Uematsu, right? Nojima gets his hate, Kitase, Nojima, so on and so forth, right? People criticize certain things that they do. But I think for the most part, when it comes to like the FF7 shit and what Nojima has come up with, I've been a fan of. I can't speak for literally everything, right? And I know like Dirge of Cerberus is something I'm not very well versed in, and Dirge of Cerberus is pretty weird, kind of out there with some of the shit they do in that game, right? I'm not saying it has no redeeming qualities, because there's aspects of it that I do like. But yeah, like not everything they do is like 100% the best thing ever. But I think for the most part, when I see Nojima being a part of a project, Uematsu part of a project, Nomura being a part of a project, I'm a fan.
もう安心感です。お二人は。やっぱり世界中からこう
ナノファンからこう信頼も受けてる通り、なんかお願いして心配だなって思うことはない。
Actually, just to play a bit of devil's advocate here when we're talking about Nojima, like Final Fantasy X. I think, Final Fantasy X itself, I think is a masterpiece. 10-2's a fun game. The story's kind of whatever, but the game itself was very, very fun. But then like Final Fantasy X 2.5 and Final Fantasy X Will are just generally negatively received by the community a lot of times. And I can agree with it, especially with just how vague some of it is, so on and so forth, whatever, right? Sends back for no reason. Like, it's just kind of weird shit, right? So it's not like Nojima just is perfect with everything that he writes, so to speak. But I like most of his projects. The whole section's just wholesome as hell, right? It's just these guys talking very positively about each other. The last part's one that I think is probably the most wholesome, is just Uematsu talking about Nomura and Nojima. Like, even though Nomura's technically his junior, right, he still gets motivation from him. So whenever Nomura asks him to do something, he takes it very, very seriously and kind of relies on him for that. And then talking about Nojima, how busy Nojima is. He's always working on some sort of project, that he would never want to be like his rival, and that if Nojima was a composer, he'd essentially have to throw in the towel because how dedicated he is. He'd probably be better than Uematsu, that sort of thing. Just really wholesome, man. Just good. Just the boys big up in each other. That's the shit I like.
お願いしますって言われると、なんか逆にこう身が引き締まるというかね、偉くなった後輩に頼まれるとなんか頑張んなきゃ俺っていうふうに、すごく今回の身が引き締まる感じがしましたね。頼もしい存在になったと思います。だからライバルになりたくないんですよね。勝てないから。シナリオでよかったと思って。作曲屋だったらなんか勝てそうにない感じがする。
Then move to a section where they talk about their past work, specifically the original FF7 on the PlayStation, how none of them knew what to do with the new technology. Uematsu wasn't using time codes to implement the music. He was just kind of singing it out loud and shit. Nojima had no idea what to do with the new technology. Nomura was still doing like the art by hand and shit at the time. And it's really Katase that, was trying to move on to digital.
字もだから手書きで書いて横に絵添えてとかやってたんで、しばらくサーバーとかそういう PC を触ってなんかとかやらなかった。
は多分新しい機材が一気にたくさん席に増えた頃なんで、僕も分かってないっちゃ分かってなかったんですけどね。
これセブンのラストの曲ってタイムコード使ってないんだよ。映像を見せてもらって自分で歌いながら。こんな感じ。It's
kind of crazy to think about when you hear that coming from them and look back at, what FF7 came to be, like how iconic it is, that they weren't even really working with like the full capacity of the technology at the time, right? Like Nomura's still doing art by hand. Uematsu's not even using time codes implementing the music and shit like that, right? It's just kind of insane to think about that like FF7 could have actually technically been better if they were using the new equipment and shit. Or maybe you could argue that it's better because they didn't. Skip forward a little bit because some of what comes after that last part is not necessarily worth talking about, but they get to a part where they start talking about Vincent, that apparently his design took a while, and Nojima kind of nervously was asking Nomura like where the art was or something. And like the first iteration, I guess, that Nomura drew got thrown out because Katase wanted the shoes to be pointier, is what he says, and wanting Vincent to be more vampiric.
ヴィンセントのキャラだけがなかなかデザインが終わらなくて、
なんかヴィンセントは北さんがすごいこだわりがあって、一回描いたらダメ出しを食らって大したこだわりではなかったかな。でも普通の先をとんがらしてみたいな。北さんはこうヴァンパイアみたいなやつにしたいみたいなことを言ってたような気がする。
Uematsu talks about the music for the final boss of FF7, of course, One Winged Angel, and adding a chorus to it, and how back then he doesn't remember who it was, but somebody says, "I don't get it," right? Can you not make something better for the final boss? And he told him, wait and see. And of course he was right, because goddamn, that's one of the most iconic tracks in all of Final Fantasy.
あれね、あれにラスボスに曲をセットしてみんなに聞かした時に誰か覚えてないけどちょっと訳が分かんないって言ってこうラスボスらしいこうスカーンといったかっこいい曲にできませんかねって誰かが言ってたんだよな。でも大丈夫だ、そのうち分かるからってその時は言っといた。
It shows how good Uematsu is. I mean, I can't compliment the guy enough, obviously. His success, his track record speaks for itself, but just him calling a shot and being correct on it, right? Of course, the last boss music for FF7 was what it should have been, like what he came up with, right? But it makes you wonder, too, like, had he listened to that person, whoever that person was, for whatever reason, he listened to that person, like, we could have had a completely different final boss music for FF7, and who knows what that could have been. Then finally move on to start talking about Remake and Rebirth, and Uematsu talks about, obviously, not working on like the full soundtrack of the game, how taxing that would be, but he's glad that he got to work on some of the songs for the game and how impressed he is by what they've done with the remake project. And Nomura even talks about how years ago during like the planning phases for the remake project, he could tell how big of an undertaking this was going to be and almost didn't really want to do it. And even once the production got started, kind of wanted it to end, but there was no half-assing it, of course, with the remake project, and at least now they're past the midway phase.
まあちょうどこう体調崩してとかいろいろあってサウンドトラックの方からは外させてもらったんですけど、いやもうやんなくてよかったなと思ってあれは相当な重荷だぞあれ
いやしんどいっすよ本当に
ね。それでもリメイクもリバースもなんかね歌物とか呼んでいただいてすごい僕は光栄ですね。うん、少しでも貢献できて幸せです。
そもそもリメイク今回立ち上げるよりもただもう数年前にこの企画はやろうとしていたんで、その頃からおそらくやるとなったらこんぐらいやらないとまずいだろうとは思っていたから半ばちょっと嫌だった。これは大変なことが始まってしまったと思って、だから僕は始まった瞬間から早く終わりたいと思って早く終えたい早く終わんないかなと思いながら始めてる。やっと真ん中より後ろの方に来たって感じ、
Which is completely understandable, right? You're taking the original FF7, which was one game, and you're breaking it apart into 3 full-sized games, but you're also like remaking this iconic game, right? One of the most iconic games of all time for like a modern generation. Like I can understand why Nomura was apprehensive at first, right? Nojima talks about how like he didn't know that they, back when they did like Crisis Core and Avid Children, that it would be connecting to something like the remake project, and he had planned things out a little bit better. But one of the interesting bit that came from that I thought was that he said that he was shown the remake project around the same time the general public got to see it, and it was an emotional moment for him, which is kind of cool though, that he didn't like, you'd think him being one of the big dudes that Square Enix would have got to see like everything along the way, but he kind of got to see it for the first time around the same time we did apparently.
AC とか CC とかやってる時こういう風につながるとは思ってなかったんで、もうちょっとちゃんと設計しておけばよかったんだなっていうそのタイミングは一般のユーザーの方とそう変わらないので、それだけで泣けますね。
Then move on to talking about the theme songs for Remake and Rebirth, Hollow and No Promises to Keep respectively. And I think it's just worth mentioning just because people have argued about it for the last couple of years, but Nomura confirms that Hollow is about Cloud and No Promises to Keep is about Aerith. And the second one, I don't think there's too much debate on that, but for some reason people have argued about what Hollow is directly about, for some reason, who it's about.
1作目はクラウドのイメージでいきたくて、2作目はエアリスのイメージでいきたいってとこまでは決めてたんで。
That doesn't make me wonder though, since you have Remake's theme song being specifically about Cloud, Rebirth's theme song being specifically about Aerith, who or what is the third theme song going to be about? Is it going to be about kind of the group, the party as a whole, or is there going to be another individual character in mind? I don't know. I would assume the whole party. Kind of interesting bit about No Promises to Keep is that Uematsu learned while practicing with the band that you could sing the lyrics to the song in Japanese, even though it was designed in mind to be sung by an English speaker, whatever. The song's meant to be in English. And he went to Nojima with that, and Nojima was like, yeah, I wrote it that way. Which is kind of crazy that Nojima's like that good. Like, he can write the song for Rebirth, but it's meant to be sung in English, but can also be sung in Japanese. Jesus. That guy's talented as fuck. Also kind of interesting about this section is seeing how particular Nomura is with these theme songs for both games and like the ideas that he has for them and how effective they are. And like Uematsu loved the ideas. Like for Hollow, for example, he wanted it to be a ballad, but also have like kind of like a repeated term, which a particular word said multiple times throughout the song, which of course, if you've heard Hollow, it's the word Hollow. And also when it came to the theme song they were going to do for Rebirth, he already had Lauren in mind, which everybody loved her, and she's obviously the one singing No Promises to Keep.
これはもう2作目はある意味こうイメージがもう最初からできてたんで、それをお伝えしてこういう雰囲気イメージがあるっていうのでローレンさんの歌唱映像を見せて、僕のあくまでこう曲の雰囲気とか声のイメージとかっていうのはこういう感じですっていう
美眼みたいのはあると思うんでいいかもねと思って、僕はあんまり反論とか何もなかったよね、あの時はね。
そうですね、あの時はみんな、
いいかもねこの人って、
ちょっとロックっぽくしたいっていう話で、
そうでも今回はバラードでいいって言うから、よっしゃ来た一番最初のね僕らも参加したミーティングで哲がね何かキーワードを何度も何度も繰り返し歌うようにしたいって言ってたんで、僕もねそういうのって好きなんですよ。あともう一つ驚いたのは自分のバンドでこの「No Promises to Keep」を練習したりするわけですよ。 その時に歌ってる子が「出ますか?」って言って「これ英語じゃなくて日本語でも全部歌えるんですよ」えとか言って「マジで?」って「ちょっと歌ってみ?」って言って歌ってもらったら全部歌えんの。で早速録音したてのやつを野島君に「これ日本語で歌えんだぜ」って言ったらそのように書きました。すげえ。
Then they actually get a section where they show us like behind the scenes of Lauren recording No Promises to Keep like in studio and just kind of seeing the process of that. There's nothing to really break down there, but it's just seeing the process is just absolutely fascinating.
This is Mr. Uematsu. He's the composer. You're going to be working with him today?
歌い方本当にほぼほぼ素晴らしいと思います。で、一回こちらでダウンロードして聞いて細かい部分を聞いて直してほしい歌詞をピックアップしますので、ちょっとローレンさんにはお休みいただいて休んでていただいて、このシとドをね、オクターブかけようかな。レミゴー。なるほど。いいんじゃない？
お疲れ様でした。
Okay.
Nojima then talks about the meaning behind No Promises to Keep and says that it's not really about Cloud or Zack or anyone specific, which obviously depending on what sector of the FF7 community you're in, it does mean that, right? Like it's for the people that are at Cloud and Aerith or whatever, that's what the song's about. But having Nojima tell you that it's not, kind of gets rid of that, right? It's not about any one particular person. It's kind of about everything. And also that the song's about like the burden of her destiny being the last Setra, of course, and that her fate is a promise itself, and that she, see how unhappy her mom was, right? And doesn't want that for herself.
エアリスの気持ちを歌った歌ではあるんですけども、クラウドへとかザックスへとかそういうふうにはそういうのはちょっと違うかなって思ってたんで、音が聞こえないようにいろいろあちこちに工夫したかな。まあ普通に恋の歌でいいんです。あなたと会ったことでもう世界が変わって、その約束するんじゃなくて偶然会えたら嬉しいねっていうそういう歌でありつつも、エアリスってセトラ古代種なんでいろいろその運命を背負っちゃってるんですよね。その運命の呪縛みたいなのを常に抱えてる女の子なんで、運命ってこの約束みたいなものじゃないですか。でその古代種はエアリスにとってはもうお母さんなんで、お母さんの決して幸せではなかった人生がどうしても自分に重なっちゃうんで、そういう約束から逃れたいみたいな。
Start talking about like the future, talking about Rebirth, and kind of teasing and talking about the third game a bit. And while Uematsu is not confirmed to be working on the third game, they do kind of like Nomura kind of jokingly ask him if he'll be a part of the project, and he seems to confirm that he will be, obviously. And I think he would be, right? He's gonna at least, I would think, come on and do the main theme for the game, right? Like he did Hollow, No Promises to Keep. Why would he not do the main theme song for the third game? Also, Nomura does seem to confirm that Nojima and him are already hard at work on the third game, which they probably have been for quite a while at this point.
まだ正式なオファーはしてないですけど、仮押さえということでやってもらえますよねっていう会社の正式なオファーじゃないからただ俺の口約束みたいな感じになっちゃうんだけど、やってもらうってことで大丈夫ですよねっていう。
僕はもう光栄ですよ。本当に。
野島さんはもうやってるからね、3作目一緒に。そうか。もう始まってんだ。そうかそうか。もう始まってるんで。
More kind of teases Uematsu about like how is he going to top his previous works, right? Like how are you going to make a song that's better than No Promises to Keep or Hollow? I personally think that Hollow is a better song just to kind of listen to. Like it's like I've said before on this channel a lot. It's like on my workout playlist and shit, right? Like the song comes on, I'm lifting more weights, I'm hitting more reps. The song gets me pumped, right? No Promises to Keep is still a great song for sure, but I just personally like Hollow better. So I'm very excited to see what Uematsu does with that third game.
いやいやもう光栄ですね。そう言っていただけてね。
けどすごいやった感があった。今回の超えるものですからどうします？
どうする？
何やります？
ちょっと一休みしよう。ちょっと休もう。
And that's pretty much it for the video, my dudes. I wasn't exactly sure how long this video is going to be. It's a little bit shorter than I thought, to be honest. I was thinking like 30 plus minutes potentially, just because it's like a 40-minute video. You don't know how much you're going to have to like stop and talk about and break down and things like that. And while this wasn't like the most groundbreaking information we've ever talked about on the channel, this might be one of my favorite videos I've ever broke down, man. Just getting to see the boys just chilling together, talking, and just laugh. Like the whole time there's joking around. It's just so fascinating to see. Just because like somebody like Nomura is always so stoic, like I've said, in everything I've ever seen him in. Just seeing him joke around with his friends, people he's been friends with for God, how long now? 20, 30, 40 years? I don't know how long it's been. Like, goddamn, they've known each other forever. And like Nojima, I don't think I've ever seen Nojima too much in like video kind of interviews and like settings and shit, right? I've seen him like quoted a lot in interviews. I just don't know that I've seen him in the video format a lot. So just getting to see Nojima talk is just fascinating. And then Uematsu steals the show. The whole video is made better because he's there, right? It's him talking about anything. It's so fascinating. It's really good to see them just talk about everything, right? Just reminiscing on the past, talking about the present, talking about the future a little bit. Like it was just really good. It's really wholesome, really great video. Loved it. Anyways, my dudes, that'll be the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame, we blow that like Coltrane, we in here like low gain or leave it like Cobain.